resources. Because the third objective talks now about the sharing of benefits generated or arising from the utilization of the genetic resource. So the protocol focuses on a definition for the utilization. And this definition is rather broad. The key element in this definition is to conduct research and development on the genetic and or biochemical composition. So that means and implies that it's not only the DNA or RNA, the genetic information is the one which is in the focus of the access benefit sharing regime, but also the compounds, biochemical compounds, which are resulting out of the processes within the cells, the biochemical components which are being produced in the cells, which could be proteins, any other substances, fragrances. So these all would be expressions of the genetic information which are being produced by organisms. Article 5 talks about the fair and equitable sharing of benefits. Benefit sharing, there is no benefit sharing obligation, and that is also, I think, important to highlight. Based on the utilization of the genetic resources, the benefit sharing is not linked with the access, but with the utilization definition, as well as subsequent applications and commercialization. So also the users further down the line do have a basic benefit sharing obligation. So it's not only the one who accesses first the genetic resource. Benefit sharing is also highlighted in the film, may include monetary, non-monetary benefits. Monetary benefits, we mentioned that already, could be upfront payments, milestone payments, and license fees. But much more important in many situations are the non-monetary benefits, especially in situations where basic research is taking place, and basic research is very often taking place before a commercial lead is being developed, which will lead to a commercial product. And these non-monetary benefits can then include trainings, capacity building, involvement of national researchers, providing stipendia for grants for PhD students or postdoc students and so on. But also, I think from a political perspective, a research policy perspective at the national level, to build the capacities and try to use ABS agreements to build the research capacities in the provider countries, I think is a very important aspect which should be seen as part of non-monetary benefits, so that you can use these research corporations to build your own capacities, to develop higher products and then also get higher benefits. And Article 5, of course, also fleshes out much more concretely than Article 8J in the conventions that benefit from the utilization of traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources must take place with the indigenous and local communities based on mutually agreed terms. So the Nagoya Protocol requires, if you want to use traditional knowledge associated with the genetic resource, you have to negotiate mutually agreed terms for getting access to this knowledge. Article 6 then talks about access to genetic resources and fleshes out the key requirements for how access should take place. And access needs to be based on prior informed consent, including prior informed consent from the indigenous and local communities if they have established rights to grant access, which is the case in a number of countries, not in all countries. That will depend on the national legislations and national situation. And parties which require PIC, and that is an important phrase because that leaves it open that countries may decide not to require prior informed consent. That is the case, for example, many European countries will take not to require PIC to grant free access to their genetic resources. But countries who want to have an ABS system based on prior informed consent, they have to provide with their regulations for legal certainty, clarity and transparency. Because it's of course also difficult for a company to get, or for researchers to utilize the genetic resource if they don't have the legal certainty that they have the right to use it for what they want to use it. So that the national regulations must provide this legal certainty and clarity. The country, the provider country, must provide a written decision by a competent national authority, and that must be, of course, should be cost effective and in a reasonable period of time. Also, experience shows that in some countries which came up with ABS legislation very early in the late 90s, that the regulations they set up did not provide for a reasonable period of time for decision making. Access applications were hanging and dragging in the system, the decision-making system, for 2 and 3 and 4 years. But at the time when access was granted, or if it was granted, the researchers didn't have any interest anymore to actually access the genetic resources, because research priorities had been shifted or funds had been lost, and it was not relevant at the time anymore. So there must be, it must be in a reasonable period of time. Issue at the time of access, the provider country must issue an access permit as evidence that prior informed consent and mutually agreed terms have been established. So the permit is practically the document which states you have done everything according to the regulations and to the regulatory system of the providing country, and this permit should be then notified to the ABS clearinghouse, which is also going to be established under the Nagoya Protocol. Article 7 talks about access to traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources. This should be done, should be regulated by domestic law, but it must be based on prior informed consent and mutually agreed terms with the ISCs. But there is a lot of there are a lot of degrees of freedom for countries how they want to regulate that. That will depend very much on the national situation, and gives room for the development of creative solutions, how to involve indigenous local communities in national decision making on these processes. Article 8 talks about non-commercial, among others, about non-commercial research, and the Nagoya Protocol is asking countries to develop simplified measures, to establish simplified measures for access for non-commercial research, but taking into account that such regulations or such mutually agreed terms for non-commercial research must take into account that later on the intent of the research might change, and that has to be notified back to the country. Maybe a new access permit has to be issued, or it can be stated that what are the conditions for change of intent. So that must be taken into account when providing a special system of simplified measures for non-commercial research. On traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources, Article 12 the key point there is that parties shall support the development of community protocols for access to traditional knowledge, and as well as minimum requirements for mutually agreed terms and model contractual clauses for benefit sharing. So that is exactly what I said before. There is room for creating a national system which links the traditional customary uses and customary governance systems with the formal governance system, formal decision-making processes. So there, community protocols are seen, and community procedures are seen as a key instrument and a key requirement to get prior informed consent from indigenous local communities. And of course, support is also implied in this article to develop model contract clauses and minimum requirements, what needs to be stated, realizing that many IISC groups are not aware, sufficiently aware to negotiate legal contracts with companies, and that their support is needed from outside. A very important element, the ABS clearinghouse, which is being established under the Nagoya Protocol, that is one of the key inventions of the Nagoya Protocol, linking the access permit with the monitoring issues on following up where and how are genetic resources which are being accessed are being utilized. The basic key point is that the ABS Clearinghouse should make available information about ABS policies, legislation, and regulations. There should be clearly established the contact information of the national focal point, who is the one-stop shop somehow in the country who can guide a user to what are the procedures and what are the requirements for getting access for genetic resources in the country, and also the details which are the competent national authority or authorities. Countries are free to decide whether they want to have one competent national authority, which could be the Ministry of Environment, but also for plant genetic resources, food and agriculture, for example, also the Ministry of Agriculture could play a key role, or the Ministry of Forest for non-timber forest products. So that also depends on the national system, how the national governance is, how the national governance system is being developed. Also for federal states, state level authorities might play a role. So it's not necessarily that you have to have one competent national authorities, but also it could be several. And the access permits which parties have to issue at the time when access is taking place, they will be, at the very moment when they are being forwarded to the ABS Clearinghouse mechanisms, they will become an internationally recognized certificate of compliance, which then the user can use at later stages when he has to prove whether he has obtained the genetic resource he is working with or commercializing in a legally manner. Next slide. And that leads us to the compliance and the monitoring issues of the protocol, which are much more concretely fleshed out than under the Bonn guidelines, but still it could have been much more concrete. But let's see. The parties with users of genetic resources under their jurisdiction, that means companies and researchers in using countries, have to provide that genetic resources are being accessed in accordance with prior informed consent and mutually agreed terms, requirements of the providing party. So the user countries have to make sure that their users are following the legislations and regulations of the providing countries, and they have to take measures to address situations of non-compliance. How these measures could look like, the Nagoya Protocol is that rather open, so that is something where we still have to look into and see how countries like Japan and the countries in the European Union are going to implement these measures and what they will come up with. Examples are, for example, Norway, which has established in its ABS legislation a requirement that if there's an accusation of non-compliance with national regulations or with an ABS agreement, that the general attorney has to follow up this case and launch an investigation. And if this accusation is valid, then also have to legally follow up with the user under Norwegian jurisdiction. Monitoring the utilization of genetic resources is another key point, and that should be done through the designation of one or more checkpoints, which are collecting information on the prior informed consent and the establishment of mutually agreed terms. So user countries are required to set up at least one checkpoint where they can, if a genetic resource is being utilized in that country, whether it has been obtained legally by from a provider country, meaning that basically the certificate, the international certificate of compliance, whether that is available or not and has been granted or not. So that links the ABS Clearinghouse with the checkpoints to make it workable. And potential checkpoints are, for example, patent applications, food and drug approval processes, but also, for example, the large publishing, research publishing houses could ask for proof of an international certificate of compliance before accepting scientific publications. So that would be the case then for non-commercial research, and of course, for commercial research, then patents and food and drug approval processes and so on. So there's still room for creative development of what could be checkpoints to make the system really work. Mutually agreed terms, yes, also an issue of relating to compliance should include dispute resolution clauses. So if there's a dispute coming up, that first internal agreed procedures are being run through and gone through to solve the problem bilaterally between the two parties to the agreement, and only after these processes haven't been successful, then of course the government established mechanism and follow-up mechanism should take place. Next slide. I think that's it. I hope that provided a little more insight and clarity, and also highlighted maybe some of the open issues which are still necessary to be addressed. I think it's quite a challenge for many countries to implement that, the Nagoya Protocol at the national level, and I hope that the role play will flesh out some of these issues which are resulting out of the Nagoya Protocol as it has been negotiated and agreed. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the session, how we come up with and what your ideas are, and how you are addressing some of these challenges in the role plays. Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas, for this comprehensive presentation. I must say it's always a challenge to, when you give a presentation on ABS, I mean, every presentation is a challenge, but I think especially this subject is a challenge because you never know where to start and where to stop. So that's always difficult. But we thought that it would also be good to give the possibility for participants to raise questions immediately after our presentation. So if there's anything unclear, or if you would like to ask for further details on one of the issues that were raised by Andreas, please raise your hand and we'll give you the mic so that you can speak up. So, any questions?
I have a question of Article 8A. Actually, in Article 8A, there mention about special consideration for scientific purposes. But we don't know what's the simple method for access for the scientific purpose. Do you know any example of that simple method, or some a group they are trying to make that, or something?
I think the best example for a clear differentiation between commercial and non-commercial research access permits is Australia. Australia has a very easy system for non-commercial research. In the federal Australian government has a very simple a system set up where you fill in a standard document with your research proposal, and then you simply within this, I think the minimum time is 10 days, you will get an access permit, and you have to sign, and that is a key point in the Australian system, the statutory declarations that everything which you have stated in your proposal and everything which you stated in the intent of your research is true, and if you violate the statutory declaration, you will fall under the punishment system of statutory declarations in Australia, which I think lead up to 4 years imprisonment. If you change your intent, if anything of commercial interest is coming out of this basic research, well, you have to go back to the Australian authorities and negotiate a commercial agreement, which is then a more complex process. We have to disclose much more information, and a full benefit sharing agreement will be negotiated then between you and the Australian authorities. But that allows for quite easy and rapid access for scientists who want to do basic scientific research, and the statutory declaration is this, the barrier and the legal document which you have to sign, and requiring you to come back to the authorities if you change your intent.
Any other?
Thanks. I was just wondering about the history on the decision between applying it to biological resources or genetic resources, and it looks like genetic resources still refers to biological resources in the definition, so what's the difference?
Yes. In the CBD negotiations already, this dispute was there, whether it should be a benefit sharing requirement based on biological resources or genetic resources. And as I said, the developing countries very much fought for the biological resource benefit sharing.